Hi, I'm Wayne Holtham. I'm the Digital Transformation Whisperer. And today we're here to talk to Sandeep.
I think having custodianship of the artifacts, having a consistent message, which is very on point given that Australia is about to have an election. It is exactly where what I think the first couple of months, it was pivotal in the first couple of months to bring this project back on track. And with it, you get the bonus effects of time as well as cost management.
Yes,
So which is
right.
which we can talk about again.
And you didn't walk into something that was really easy and laid out, because at the time when you actually walked into this project, it was actually stopped. It was one of those things that there was a halt because they couldn't get this ability to be able to get the solution integrator and the customer on the same page. And so your role became a very pivotal role. That first 2 months really allowed you to be able to set a stage for them to be able to continue on forward. And I suppose the listeners may be thinking, oh well, so everything went great from there, and so everything was on time and on budget. So tell us about some of those challenges you had where the customer learnt things and wanted extra, or the solution integrator hadn't discovered some things and wanted to actually include those now, even though they had a contract that gave them some amount of cost expectation, but not necessarily limited to a fixed cost. So walk us through that.
So there are two aspects that come to mind straight away. First one is contract management. So service, master service agreements and those sorts of things. And the words that you put, that the SI puts in there, or the system integrator puts in there, are important. So the way that's communicated, the pricing structure that's agreed on, all those elements are very critical. They were all negotiated well before I joined, but it played a part in our expectations management and how the client expected that the system integrator should be delivering a certain amount of project governance, and that's a specific incident that happened, which was misaligned to the system integrator's initial estimate of how much they needed to be involved in project governance. So which is a little bit different from project management, right? So in this respect, it'll be the contract management side of things. It'll be the costing burn down reports and all of that reporting, and to manage resourcing from the project from the system integrator side. So I think the challenge I had there is not just to say, well, am I meeting my timeline and cost budget, but also the management of the agreement between the two parties. So almost and how essential it is that we have things in black and white well before we start the project.
And it's interesting because that contract in itself actually had phases, and so one of the things I often talk about as a thing for customers who are going to buy software and implement software is that they shouldn't just have one contract that is 3 or 4 years long or 2 years long. They should actually have it in phases, and so this project had that as part of it. But that's always not that easy to manage, because all of a sudden you're expecting one phase to finish, the other one to start, and trying to manage those deliverables to have this entry exit type approach is challenging, because software integrators might go, I've completed that, but the customer's going, well, you haven't really, we can't really proceed. And so it's managing that dynamic as well.
Yeah, and a lot of times statement of work or any kind of master services agreements will have that kind of, especially if it's designed by the system integrator, will have a lot of those contingencies in play to say, well, this is a best estimate that we have, but if we go over, we will charge. Now, the part they don't usually expand on is how the agreement of those extra charges will occur. So as you mentioned, often the friction is where the client's expecting a certain outcome or had that outcome in their mind the whole way through and they may not necessarily, and this is the challenge, right? They may not have necessarily articulated it, or even if they did, they just articulated it verbally. Now, there's nothing wrong in that. You can't, it's difficult to keep every single thing on a contract. But I think when it comes to having an expectations and then that expectation not met in both sides, that becomes our friction resolution process. So in some respects, that has to be well managed as well. One of the things that we put in place is a weekly check-in with the senior leadership of the system integrator.
Okay.
Right, and what that helped us do is that we had a representative from the project, from the system integrator, and their leadership, and we had a couple of representatives, myself of course, and a representative of our internal steerco. So it became like a mini steering committee right there, and we could make decisions on where we were anticipating extra spend to happen, where the misalignment of what we thought we were going to deliver wasn't matching up with what was, and so on and so forth. So we were able to, and this is very effective. We were able to resolve the little things that then didn't compound to something catastrophic and cause another big pause or big shutdown of the project. So I thought that was very helpful, very useful, and very effective. And we continued doing that basically from first 3 months of the project all the way to the end.
Because what I'm hearing there is, it's that proactiveness. It's saying that we know that this is upcoming, and everybody's on the same page about what it is. Whereas typically I've seen where the solution integrator just goes off and does its work and hopes the customer does its bit, and then gives a change request and says, well, I need this money because we spent this much. Whereas what you're talking about there is really proactively managing both parties. And the other thing I think I heard there was that you had the executive sponsor of the software integrator being part of this, and often you find that they aren't as hands-on as what I've heard with what you've talked about in this particular instance. And I think that's an important thing, because for them, they've got parties in their own companies that they need to manage. And if they're only just relying on a project manager who maybe is only doing 20% of his time on the project, then it makes it really difficult. And it sounds like you actually manage that situation quite well.
Yes, it was, again, not without its challenges, but we established and stuck with it, which is very important. And of course, we were giving everyone an opportunity to voice any concerns. We were bringing the concerns that we got out of those weekly sessions into the steerco.
Yes.
So I think a few things lined up for me, or for the project rather, which was we had that engagement with our key external stakeholders, but we also had decision making also done in a very structured way. Mm-hmm. So bringing that expectations management and decision making in an objective, it's structured, data-led way, we were able to, by and large, get past the whole, well, I expected something different, or I'm not, as an organization, especially a small to medium-sized organization, it's very difficult to spend much more than what they had budgeted for the project. Larger organizations may have a bit of fat in their budget and so on, but smaller organizations have a tough time with this.
Mm.
And often,
and you raise a point that I suppose that as people may be listening to this and they're going, well, so did this project finish on time? Did it cost more? And the typical, when we talk about failures, is we always blame the fact that if it's a failure, if it's cost more, or if it's actually taken more time. But in this case, it sounds like the client along the way learnt how to do what it needed to do to actually embrace software, become ready for software, which is true transformational type work. And I suppose the expectation is that we go in thinking it's going to take this long and it's going to cost this much. But in reality, we learn that, we're not as ready as we think as clients. The software integrator probably thinks that everything's going to happen quickly and they're going to move along quite quickly. and those things don't happen. And so, I think the thought that we might consider failure as being more time and more cost, I don't always think that's a fair measure, in the sense that, did they achieve the expectation of digital transformation as a result of their outcome? And yeah, the cost became a necessary thing, and the extra time became a necessary thing. But once go live happens, the organisation then is in a much better position to actually take on that software and really leverage the value it's going to create over time. But once not, get it go live. So what's your thoughts on that? What the client has actually probably achieved out of this, knowing it didn't actually finish on their expected time.
I think when we unpack that, did this project was this project successful if you objectively measured against those three pillars? I would say for the time and the cost, it would fail. The quality part would, that is again measurable in many other ways, but let's say it failed on all three pillars in the traditional objective sense.
Yeah.
However, if you ask the organization whether that project failed on all three measures, I believe they will say no. And the reason that they believe it was a success is because they were able to push back and make a case that going live earlier to meet that timeline was more detrimental than pushing it back.
Yeah.
So I think ultimately that as a project manager, I do need to be involved in an objective, as I said before, the data-based approach or data-led approach. And I do need to work out the numbers. And I did that. And we worked out the numbers. And we said, okay, well, this is what it's going to cost us for every month that we delay the project. Right? And at first, I got the reaction, as you do with most small organizations, going, what? That's what we spend? Which is, I won't go into numbers, but it's actually less than what most other large organizations spend. However, as I said before, for a small organization, these numbers can be quite jarring. So when you go, what, that's what we spend on resources, licensing, fixed overhead costs and infrastructure, personnel, internal, external, their reaction is usually a bit of a visceral one. Now, having said that, I encourage them to think about what they would lose in terms of sales, manufacturing, and their processes or their losses as an organization, and put that into numbers as well, because I'm not sure how often that is encouraged, and I don't see that very often, to go, okay, well, what is our cost-benefit analysis? This is a very simple cost-benefit analysis. So we go, right, once we establish that we make a good point to push back, the appreciation from the senior leadership and the people on the ground is that, yes, it makes sense to move the project timeline. So now I go back to the same question, which is that seen as a project failure? Like I said, objectively, it probably does. We've moved the timeline. It's cost us more. But the organization, the client, sees a lot more value in doing that than anything else. Now, I just want to say that the stakeholder management of this part, being data-led, was very useful, because data-led plus hearts and minds, we were working on both aspects, and we were able to get support to move the project timeline. And to me, it remains as the right thing to do. And if I were to do it again, I'd still go back and approach it in the same way.
Because there is two parts to it. One is the solution integrator has the capability and the will to actually accommodate that. But the other point you raised, which I think is a metric that many don't consider, and it's not often considered in a way that you actually talk about the cost benefit, is that if I'm not ready because I've got peak times coming up, I've got certain things that, I might have people that I need to onboard because other people have left, and it just makes no sense for me to be able to keep ploughing on when I don't actually have the right people in the roles that I know in the future they're going to need. So there's all of these reasons why it makes sense sometimes to say, it's better for us to take a breath, have a pause, ready ourselves. So when we actually do go to when we move on, we actually are ready to go. But we haven't caused as much disruption to the business, which again is a benefit because the business then isn't being penalized in two ways, because disruption is as big a problem as costs running over, because I'm compromising my revenue, because I'm disrupting the business, and that's what pays the bills as such. And so I need to be able to consider that. Whereas the point you raised there, I don't see that often in projects where that is ever considered. And I think that that's one of those things that's a really important thing that hopefully we are able to share today with the listeners, that it's more than just time, cost, and quality. It's that thing of what's the impact to the business. And you raise a great point.